The Allen Line Company appreciates all of the dedicated carriers it takes to move loads across the U.S. Stay safe.
OOIDA, representing America's truckers since 1973, presents Landline Now with your host, Mark Redding.
How should we pay for our highways? Since the advent of the interstate highway system in the 1950s, the answer has been the fuel tax. And for the overwhelming majority of that time, that worked just fine. But in the past few years, we've seen automobiles getting better and better fuel economy and more alternative fueled vehicles, most of which pay no road tax. So at some point, we will likely have to find a new way to pay. But what will that be? Two researchers at San Jose State University's Mineta Transportation Institute have for many years asked members of the public that question. I'll talk today with Dr. Asha Weinstein Agrawal, one of those researchers, about their survey results and what it tells us about where the public is headed on the topic. But first, the news with Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Mark. Our top story today. Diesel prices went down nationwide last week, breaking a 4-week streak of increases. The Energy Information Administration says a national average fell just under 4 cents to $3.82 a gallon. Of the 10 regions surveyed by EIA, 8 recorded lower prices, led by the Midwest, where the average fell just under 6 cents. The New England and West Coast, less California regions were the two outliers, where prices were up, both by about a cent. Meanwhile, ProMiles.com had the Tuesday morning average at $3.82 a gallon as well. That's up nearly 2 cents compared to the same day last week. Time now for our weekly check on the spot market. TruckStop says load posting volumes were up last week by more than 9%, but rates, including fuel, were down. Van down 6 cents to $2.01, flatbed down 2 cents to $2.43, and reefer down 13 cents to $2.41. But Brent Hutto, Chief Relationship Officer at TruckStop, said there's still money to be made out there, especially if you're working hot lanes.
We saw great rates last week out of Las Vegas, out of Fort Worth, as I've mentioned over the last many months. Texas has been the hottest marketplace in general, mostly because of the freight coming out of Mexico and moving into the United States, and Mexico being our biggest trading partner now. So if you're struggling in rates, look in Texas. I can tell you that, because flatbed, even got a bunch of Texas movements out of it, Laredo, and then there's a bunch of good freight that was out of Phoenix. So and there's been a lot of good freight out of Phoenix moving in the last couple of months as well. Those are good lanes in markets.
We'll have more from Brent tomorrow for a full picture of the market conditions out there right now. A possible strike is looming at ports along the East Coast and Gulf Coast. The International Longshoremen's Association, or ILA, says their talks with employers represented by the United States Maritime Alliance have stalled. Their current contract ends on October 1st, and if a new one isn't reached by then, the ILA intends to walk. In a statement, ILA President Harold J. Daggett said a strike is growing more likely by the day. That came after the ILA walked away from negotiations over a claim that APM Terminals and Maersk Line were using an AutoGate system, which autonomously processes trucks without ILA labor. ILA says the system was first identified at the port of Mobile, Alabama, and is being used at other ports as well. We've been here before as recently as last year, when the Department of Labor stepped in to resolve a labor dispute at West Coast ports. A labor strike at ports on the East and Gulf Coast would have wide-ranging implications for the supply chain. We'll keep you posted. The Truck Safety Coalition is asking the Department of Transportation to pick up the pace on several regulations that are being resisted by trucking groups. It came in a letter addressed to Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg this week. It reads that truck crash victims and survivors are dismayed, disappointed, and deeply disturbed by the department's inability to complete rulemakings the department committed to at the beginning of the Biden administration. Those include a speed limiter mandate on heavy-duty vehicles and an AEB, or automatic emergency braking final rule, both of which are now scheduled for release next year. The Truck Safety Coalition wrote that, quote, sympathy is quick to be extended, yet results remain elusive, end quote. The group is asking DOT to make the AEB and speed limiter rules a priority without delay. Both rulemakings are opposed by groups like OOIDA. With speed limiters, the association maintains that data shows a mandate would increase interactions between heavy trucks and passenger vehicles, increasing the likelihood of crashes. For AEB systems, OOIDA maintains that there are far too many false activations with the technology right now to make it viable for widespread use, much less a subject of a mandate. The Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association and the California Trucking Association are getting more time to file their opening briefs in a lawsuit against California's Assembly Bill 5. The two trucking groups argue that the state's worker classification law, known as AB 5, violates the U.S. Constitution. In April, OOIDA and the California Trucking Association filed a notice to take the case to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit. Opening briefs were due on July 5th, but the groups received an extension and now have until August 5th to make their initial arguments to the court. It's the next step in a years-long battle. California signed AB 5 into law in 2019, requiring a business to demonstrate that three factors are established before a worker can be considered an independent contractor. The California Trucking Association filed a lawsuit soon after, and OOIDA joined as an intervener representing out-of-state truckers who could be harmed by the California law. Both groups have argued that AB 5 imposes undue burdens on interstate commerce in violation of the Commerce Clause. If the case remains on schedule, the trucking groups will submit their opening briefs by August 5th. The state will then have until September 4th to respond. A weather alert in effect for southern Illinois, where several miles of Interstate 64 were shut down Tuesday due to flooding. This is in Washington County, outside of St. Louis. The Illinois State Police reported earlier Tuesday that I-64 was closed between the cities of Richview to Oakville. Floodwater had made its way onto the roadway in both directions. Routes 15 and 127 in the area are also being affected. Residents in Nashville, Illinois were told to evacuate because a dam would be at imminent risk of bursting. The Washington County Emergency Management Agency said the failure occurred after more than 5 inches of rainfall. If your GPS tells you to head that way, find an alternate route. For up-to-the-minute traffic conditions there in Illinois, or any other state for that matter, head to landline.media and click on Road Conditions for Truckers under the Resources tab. The Nebraska DOT has put out an alert over a spike in traffic deaths this year. So far this year, transportation officials there say 120 people have been killed in crashes, up from 92 over the same period last year. The Nebraska DOT said in a news release that as we approach the peak of summer travel season, it's crucial that people reflect on the responsibility they carry every time they get behind the wheel, lower their speeds, and drive safer. Cargo thieves have struck again in Philadelphia, and once again their target was a shipment of meat. Police say about 400 cases of beef valued at around $15,000 was stolen from the back of a reefer trailer in southwest Philadelphia early Tuesday morning. It's the latest in a series of cargo thefts in the Philly area. In April, about $30,000 worth of frozen snow crabs was stolen from a trailer that was parked at a Walmart delivery dock. Weeks before that, it was $12,000 worth of pork, just a few incidents in a series of them. Police have yet to announce any arrests in any of the cases. Another major U.S. city is toying with the idea of a congestion pricing program. The Boston City Council's Transportation Committee recently discussed the idea, with some members expressing support and others expressing concerns. The hearing was only a discussion about congestion pricing in general, with no specifics about how such a program may be implemented in Boston. Several committee members brought up New York City's congestion pricing program, which was paused by Governor Kathy Hochul last month amid pushback, just weeks before the plan was set to go into effect. And finally, an Irishman is celebrating his second Guinness World Records title after riding a unicycle the entire length of Ireland. That's 308 miles. It took Eamon Keaveney 5 days, 5 hours, and 23 minutes to accomplish the feat, which he said seemed like a perfect mix of daunting and ridiculous. UPI reports that Keaveney, who previously earned the record for the world's longest barefoot journey in 2016 and followed up by climbing 10 mountains barefoot in 10 days, said he had never ridden a unicycle until he started training for the title. That's Landline Now News for today. I'm Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Scott. Registration is now open for OOIDA's Truck to Success Seminar, which runs for 3 days starting October 22nd in Blue Springs, Missouri. Go to OOIDA.com. Next, I'll discuss public attitudes about how we pay for highways with Dr. Asha Weinstein Agrawal. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
Capital Reman is your leading source for quality remanufactured engines and components. Capital Reman stands ready to serve all OOIDA members to help reduce costly engine repairs or replacement. Visit capitalreman.com today and use code OOIDA10 to save.
ULSD is hurting your engine. Fight back with Howe's Diesel Defender. Get the most powerful cleaning and maximum lubricity to protect and extend the life of your entire system at a guaranteed increase in fuel economy, and you can't go wrong with Howe's.
Dispatch, I picked up that load of steel, so I'm ready to roll.
Sounds good. Remember, we're getting paid by weight, so make sure to use a CAT scale.
I wouldn't weigh anywhere else.
Forget miss accuracy, weigh your truck on a CAT scale.
It's tested and proven. Burn 2.1% less fuel when you balance all wheel ends with Centromatic. Call 800-523-8473 to get the OOIDA discount.
How should we pay for our highways? Since the advent of the Eisenhower interstate highway system in the 1950s, the answer has been the fuel tax. And for the overwhelming majority of that time, that worked just fine. You're listening to Landline Now, and I'm your host, Mark Reddick. Welcome back to the program. In the past few years, we've seen automobiles getting better and better fuel economy and more alternative fuel vehicles, most of which pay no road tax. That and other factors have led to the Federal Highway Trust Fund dwindling to an extraordinarily low level. So at some point, we will likely have to find a new way to pay. But what will that be? Two researchers at San Jose State University's Mineta Transportation Institute have for years asked members of the public that question, or more precisely, a host of questions related to the topic. I spoke recently with Asha Weinstein Agrawal, one of those researchers, about their survey results and what it tells us about where the public is headed on the topic. You conducted a survey on federal transportation tax options. Mm-hmm. First of all, can you outline what specific aspects of that topic your study looked into?
Yes. So we were interested in whether the American public would support options to increase federal tax revenue, specifically for transportation. And we focused on exploring what people thought about two concepts. One was increasing the rate for the federal gas tax. And then the other was this idea of adopting a brand new mileage fee, something we've never had at a federal level. And indeed, only a few states have even kind of started tiptoeing into that arena.
What was it that prompted you to look into this topic?
Well, we have to go back 15 years for that because we've actually been running this as a trend survey for 15 years. And at the time, mileage fees, frankly, weren't that much on people's radar, but the gas tax was. Because due to inflation eating away at the value of our gas tax, which at the federal level is just a flat 18.4 cents per gallon. And so there was, a feeling that we need something to replace what we're losing just to inflation, never mind if vehicles are getting more fuel efficient or other things. And if you looked if you went to professional meetings or you read in the newspaper, everybody said, oh, the public hates the gas tax. They would never, ever, 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 ever support raising it, and they'll throw anyone out of office who does so. And I was just curious to know if that was really true. And so that was one of the motivating factors behind this study. And we found that actually the public is not nearly so, opposed to raising the fuel tax as you would believe if you just read newspaper stories and, maybe went to some public meetings and such.
Well, let's talk about some of the detail on this survey. It was very interesting. Regarding the mileage fee, you asked about several different aspects of that. First off, what was the level of support for the broad idea of a mileage fee to replace the fuel tax?
Yes. So we asked about two different, a few versions of a mileage fee, but at the broadest level, one was just for all vehicles. What if we replaced the federal fuel tax on the gas tax with a flat mileage fee for everybody? And we had a couple of options for how the rate would be structured. And then our second broad concept that we tested was the idea of a mileage fee that would be just for commercial travel. So let's go back, though, to the mileage fee that everyone would pay. We told people, we asked them if they would support two different versions of this. In one sense, everyone would just pay 3 pennies a mile. multiply the number of miles you drive in a year, 3 pennies, that's what you'd owe. In the other version, which I call our green or sustainable version, the average people pay would be that 3 pennies a mile, but the exact rate would be pegged to the fuel efficiency or pollution level of the vehicle you're driving. So if you had a more polluting vehicle, you would pay somewhat more than 3 cents a mile. And if you had a less polluting vehicle, you'd pay somewhat less. What we have found is that far more people prefer the green version. So we found that for that flat rate fee that everybody would pay, we had 51% of people supporting the green version compared to 39% supporting the flat rate version. So, and actually what is more interesting to me is that difference between 51% and 39%. I mean, that's a pretty big difference as opposed to the exact numbers. And one thing I also want to stress, we have been asking these same 2 questions for 15 years now. And every single year, considerably more people have said they would support the green version of this mileage fee option.
I want to ask about awareness broadly of the whole concept of a mileage-based fee. We cover, of course, the trucking industry. There's pretty good awareness of it there. But among the general public, what is the level of awareness and how accurate is the public's impression of what this would be?
So that's a great and somewhat complicated question. But the one part is easy to answer, which is most people have never heard of a mileage fee. So actually this year in our survey for the first time, we did ask, how much have you heard about this mileage fee concept? A lot, a little, nothing. 60% of people said they had heard nothing. And only 10% said they had heard a lot. So I think we can safely assume that the vast majority of the public has either never heard of it or has only the vaguest idea. So that part is fairly simple. Now, you asked how accurate people's understanding is. That's a lot harder because there are 1,001 flavors of mileage fees. It's not one monolithic concept, and every state is talking about it a bit differently. Different interest groups see it differently, or those who are involved in these debates, if it happens, would prefer to shape it one way or the other. So my guess is that most people are probably not aware of that enormous diversity of options in how we implement it if we ever were to do so. They may be fairly up to date on what their state has been studying, but that would be a bit different. I actually realized, if I may go back, you had asked me about support for the concept of a mileage fee, and I'd mentioned we have these 2 flavors, one that everybody pays and one just on commercial travel. And I suspect that your members are particularly interested in support for this idea of a mileage fee that would be only on commercial travel. And we asked about people's support for that for 3 sort of classes of vehicles. One was taxis, one was ride hailing, and one was delivery and freight trucks. And here we got slightly higher support than for the mileage fee on all travel. For both the ride hailing vehicles and taxis, 53% of respondents said they would support that, and 8% of respondents said they would support a mileage fee on delivery and freight trucks. And we didn't give them any details about how the revenue would be spent or anything. It was just a very basic concept that we were testing out.
Well, let me ask kind of a devil's advocate question based on that. Looking at kind of the figures, it seems like the lower scores, the lower percentages of support are on the ones where the most people would pay or contribute, whereas the higher support seems to be, somebody else will pay this. Is this really telling us that people are okay with this as long as they're not the ones paying?
Well, first of all, I would point out there's not, to some extent, I agree with you. I would say there's not a huge difference. Like if we compare 51% of people who would support the mileage fee on all travel, the green version, to the 53% who say they, support it on taxis and ride hailing vehicles, that's kind of essentially equivalent. 51, 53, they're very, very similar. There was slightly higher approval for the idea of the fee specifically on delivery and freight. But again, it's not a huge variation, 51 versus 58. That said, I do agree with your point that I think in general, people are probably more receptive to taxes that they don't think they're going to pay. And some people may think about how increasing costs for deliveries and other, goods movement might increase prices in the long run. But I think your average person on a survey like this is not thinking through those details.
One thing I did find interesting in the figures was the support for a lower fee for low-income people.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if you could talk about how much support that idea had and what do you think is behind that in terms of people's thinking?
Sure. So as I mentioned a few minutes ago, there are 1,001 flavors of mileage fees. And one of the things that we could play around with is exactly how the rate is structured. So I've already talked about this sort of green option, but another one we were interested in was what we called our low income rate, where we asked people, would you support a lower rate for low income drivers? And we found close to 2/3 of people said that they would support that idea. And we've asked that same question for a number of years, and it's been very similar. I think that one of the biggest concerns, nobody likes to pay more taxes. So we all understand that. If we had a choice, we would pay less, whatever the tax. But I think there is, beyond sort of personal pocketbook, just a sense that, life is pretty rough if you're low income, and transportation is really expensive. And it's maybe not quite a basic right in the way we consider food or clean water, but it's in our society, it's pretty close to it. And so I think there's a desire to, give low income folks just a little bit of help in something as important to just being a basic functioning member of society, that you need to be able to get to a job and healthcare and to visit your family and all those things that aren't really luxuries. They're essentials.
Okay. Let's switch over and talk about the fuel tax.
Yes.
Overall, just speaking broadly here, what is the support for increasing the fuel tax like?
Okay, so back to what I was saying a few minutes ago. When we started this project, I was interested if the public hated the gas tax as much as everybody seemed to think. And we set this up where we asked about a number of different versions of raising the federal gas tax. In all cases, we said it would be a 10-cent per gallon increase. So the amount of the increase didn't vary. But what we did vary was what we told people that new revenue would be spent for. So the first option we ask everybody is, and this is probably mirrors more closely what you might hear if you heard just a general discussion about should we raise the gas tax, which was if the money would be for transportation. But there was no additional detail given about, what that meant, what mode, anything else. The other gas tax increase options we asked about, in each case said that the new revenue would be dedicated for a very specific kind of improvement. And all of these options had higher support than that kind of generic for transportation. And I will say for 15 years, this trend has persisted. So I think it is something that we really should pay strong attention to. Now, what were the more popular options? Every year, maintenance gets the most support. We have had year after year, kind of in the neighborhood of 2/3 of people saying they would support raising the federal gas tax if the revenue is spent to improve maintenance of streets, roads, and highways. I find it quite remarkable. I mean, I wasn't even expecting that high approval rating for tax, but there it is. And we have found year after year almost as high support for the idea of the gas tax rate increase if the money were dedicated to reducing accidents and improving safety. Well over half, and often kind of creeping up on 2/3 of people have said they would support that.
I've been talking with Asha Weinstein Agrawal, a researcher at San Jose State University's Mineta Transportation Institute, about an ongoing survey of public attitudes regarding how we pay for highways. We'll be back in a moment with more of that conversation. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Every year, 28 million people are trafficked globally. The Your Roads, Their Freedom campaign seeks to raise awareness in the transport industry. Truck and bus drivers, be vigilant on the roads. If you see something suspicious, text 233-733 or be free.
Truckdown.com. Whenever you have a breakdown, you need Truckdown.com. 24/7 access to 40,000 verified heavy-duty repair vendors nationwide. Less weight, more freight. Truckdown.com.
Firestone tires are for more of everything, with more durability for more miles and more confidence in your fleet. Firestone's tested tires help fleets save with value where it matters most. Learn more at bridgestonenationalfleet.com/4moremiles.
Landline Now, welcome back. Before the break, I was talking with Asha Weinstein Agrawal, a researcher at San Jose State University's Mineta Transportation Institute, about an ongoing survey of public attitudes regarding how we pay for highways. We were talking before the break about how the way that transportation money is spent affects the public's level of support for various transportation tax options, such as the level of taxation. Specifically, Dr. Agrawal was talking about the level of support for a fuel tax increase and how it changes when the money is spent on maintenance, on safety, or on other factors. We now continue that conversation in progress.
We then had still majority support, although it was closer to that 50% for three other options, which were projects to reduce air pollution caused by the transportation system, to reduce traffic congestion, or to reduce contributions to global warming. So I know this is a long-winded answer, but I'll try and kind of summarize here. I think the public, and I'm glad about this, is not blanket for or against a gas tax, or at least many of them. It depends if they think the new money will be spent for something they value. And if they do, then the great majority of them are maybe not happy and excited, but at least willing to tolerate that. And again, maintenance and safety are definitely the two priorities that really rise up as important to people.
One of the big topics over the years in the trucking industry, and one that really kind of gets truckers blood boiling, has been the diversion of highway taxes to things like bike and hike trails, road and highway beautification, or other purposes such as so-called transportation enhancements. Mm-hmm. And looking at the figures, to what extent is the low level of support for money being spent more generically for transportation an indication that the public is in line with that point of view?
I don't think there's a clear cut. Again, it's kind of a nuanced issue. But I will say, first of all, we outright ask people, would they support some gas tax revenue? And we did say some gas tax revenue being spent on public transit. And like 60+% of people have said they would support that year after year. So I do think that it's not a concept that is just completely anathema to people. Now, we can debate how much some should be and what people had in their mind when they were thinking about that. But it's interesting you ask about other modes as well. So we had a whole separate section of our survey where we asked people, we gave them a list of, about 10 or 15 different programs we could spend federal transportation revenue on. And we asked them, what's first of all, how high a priority should each of these be? And then to pick their key issues, three top issues for them. We had, 2/3 or more people saying that they thought it should be a priority to build and improve sidewalks, for example, or to add more existing, more frequent public transit, et cetera, or even bike paths got more than 50% of support. So I do think in general, as a principle, the majority want to see those kinds of improvements. That said, when we ask people to pull out their three top priorities, maintenance was, 41% said that maintaining local streets and roads should be, one of the top three priorities, and 43% said maintaining interstates, highways, and freeways. And lower, but 25% bid piece say that maintaining public transit should be a priority. And actually slightly higher, that providing discounted fares for low-income travelers is also a priority. Now, the bike ped stuff definitely was lower down on the list. For example, 13% thought that in building and improving bike lanes should be a top 3 priority. But I will say that was essentially identical to the percentage that thought it should be a top 3 priority to, quote, build and widen local streets and roads. So, there's a lot of diversity in what people want to see, but I don't think that that there's much evidence that they really don't want to see any federal revenue spent on these other modes.
Okay. Some of the other results that I found interesting, one in particular, the perception people have of the condition of transportation infrastructure. And the perception I think many people have is that the public is unimpressed with how things are. You see complaints all the time about potholes and deteriorating highways. And we've all seen the various report cards on the state of infrastructure.
Right.
For example, the Society of Civil Engineers. But it looked there like a majority thinks the condition of interstates, highways, and freeways is either somewhat or very good. And the positive figure appears to have increased over the past 5 to 6 years. Why do you think that is, especially in the face of so many negative comments through so many forums?
That is another great question. I also would say I was a little surprised. I think it may have something to do with the fact that we all like to gripe. You've just driven somewhere, whether you're a commercial driver and you're in your truck, or just, me going to the grocery store and you hit a pothole or the traffic is really bad. And in that moment, you gripe. However, if you sort of step back and think about it as a whole, you're probably not necessarily thinking of that really irritating experience right at that moment. There's also the question of, I think there's a little bit of people sort of wanting to be polite on surveys. I mean, you have some people who don't want to, but some people who are maybe just a little less likely to complain and moan. So they'll say, well, I guess it's somewhat good, and we did have far more people say this was somewhat good than very good, twice as many people. Now, your question about why has there been a slight uptick? Since 2019, we've been asking this, and yes, slightly more people seem to think it's somewhat or very good. The quality of interstates, highways, and freeways, less growth with local streets and roads. I mean, we have spent a lot of money over the last 5 years, federal money. Many states have increased the revenue. It's possible that people are aware of that and sort of feel hopeful and notice that some of their potholes or whatnot have been fixed. I don't know if COVID, the sort of nature of driving has changed. Certainly it changed quite a bit during COVID, and even post-COVID somewhat, certainly in the big urban areas. There's less congestion at sort of peak rush hours, maybe more at other times. I don't know if that has reset people's expectations in some way, but I'm just speculating here. I can't answer for certain.
Okay. Another thing that caught my attention, and again, a very big issue in the trucking industry, is the public perception of how safe it is to travel on roads.
Yeah.
We do have a number of safety advocacy groups that regularly press for stricter and stricter regulations framed around the issue of safety. But the survey showed that an overwhelming percentage, or at least it appeared to me, of people responding, see highway travel as either somewhat or very safe. Again, what can we draw from those figures?
Well, you're right that if we add somewhat safe and very safe, it's 80 whatever percent. However, less than a quarter said it was very safe. And I also think about all those people who said they would support increasing the gas tax for better safety, reducing accidents. I think people's standard is very safe, not somewhat safe, or at least many people. So that, I'm guessing, may explain the point that you have raised. One other thing I'll say about safety, we actually have very poor data in this country about how many crashes that involve motor vehicles actually happen. because so many just don't get reported. People don't have insurance, or it's a small fender bender and they figure it's easier to just write someone a check for $500 rather than risk having, points on their license or whatever. So just sort of out of curiosity, we did ask people in the last year, have you been in a crash, either as a driver, a bicyclist, or a pedestrian? So, somehow on the road, you got hit or hit somebody. And we had 13% of people say that they had, which is really, at first I thought, no, that can't be possible. But if you think about it, that's like roughly I think 1 in 8, something like that. If you think for yourself over 8 years, have you at some point in that period been in a collision? I think a lot of people would say yes. Again, many of these were minor. People weren't all necessarily badly injured. But I think it's just this pervasive kind of feeling for a lot of us that it's going to happen, either to us or someone we care about. And I think it makes it very real that we want a safer transportation system. We may disagree about the way to get there, but it is an important goal.
Well, and everybody wants to get home at the end of the day.
And they want their kids and their parents and everybody else. Yeah.
Well, finally, there was a series of questions regarding the public's views on the transportation system's needs, essentially priorities for improvements to the system. Based on the results of your work, what are the public's top priorities there?
Well, I'm starting to sound like a broken record here, but reducing crashes and improving safety. I mean, that was, the 70+% of people year after year have said that is, quote, very important. Maybe interestingly, although again, I think it reflects some of the other things we've talked about, ensuring that everybody, regardless of income, can conveniently get to jobs, school, healthcare was a very important priority for almost as many people. Reducing traffic congestion, health impacts from air pollution, greenhouse gas emissions. These were somewhat fewer people considered it a high priority, although it was still half or more of all people. And then last, the least popular of the ones we tested. So we tested out 6 different options. The last one was making it more convenient to go places without driving. Yes, the smallest percentage of people considered that very important, but nevertheless more than half. It was around 52% depending on the year, which is, again, I think a pretty strong statement. And that's people who think it is very important. If you add somewhat, we get up to 90% of people.
I've been having a conversation with Asha Weinstein Agrawal, a researcher at San Jose State University's Mineta Transportation Institute, about this year's results from an ongoing survey of public attitudes regarding how we pay for highways. We'll come back after a short commercial break and finish our conversation with Dr. Agrawal, and to have a brief chat with some of OOIDA's Washington, D.C. staff about truckers' attitudes and the association's goals when it comes to highway taxation and spending. Meanwhile, you can read more about Dr. Agrawal's survey and what she and her colleague, Dr. Hillary Nixon, found. You can also learn more about the Mineta Transportation Institute at San Jose State University at their website, transweb.sjsu.edu. Again, that website is transweb.sjsu.edu. We'll have a link to that, as well as a link to Landline Magazine Associate Editor Tyson Fisher's coverage of the study at our website, landlinenow.com. That's where you can find all the website links, email addresses, and phone numbers that we mention on the show. Just click on the photo or headline at the top of the page. Again, that's at our website, landlinenow.com. Again, after a short commercial break, we'll have more of my conversation with Dr. Asha Weinstein Agrawal. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Today's rising costs affect everyone. Replace your harmonic damper with a genuine VibraTech TVD viscous damper to prevent costly repairs and downtime. Keep your money in your pocket and your truck on the road with VibraTech TVD. Recommended replacement at 500,000 miles or 15,000 hours.
Ready to make more money? Use a better load board. For a limited time, get 50% off TruckStop Load Board Pro. Just go to truckstop.com/go and enter promo code READY2024 when you purchase Load Board Pro.
Are you tired of the IRS following you around like a dark cloud? Call 888-557-4020 and get your life back.
Since you started, what you've loved about trucking is the freedom. Heading out on your favorite route, a good driving song, and thinking about truck insurance. Well, maybe not that last one. That's why we're here. At OOIDA, we have a full range of truck insurance products, expert advice, and great customer service, helping you get the right coverage for your operation. Go to OOIDA.com because your job is to drive. Our job is to help with everything else.
Landline Now. Welcome back. Before the break, I was having a conversation with Dr. Asha Weinstein Agrawal, a researcher at San Jose State University's Mineta Transportation Institute, about an ongoing survey of public attitudes regarding how we pay for highways. We now continue that conversation in progress.
Well, this is something among sort of the transportation professionals I interact with, who are more the planners and the engineers and the policy people. They always find somewhere between distressing and amusing as we ask people, when was the federal gas tax rate last raised? And we give people like in the last 2 years, 3 to 10 years ago, whatever, more than 20 years ago. Only 2% of people correctly guessed that it has been more than 20 years since we have raised the federal gas tax rate. Now, more than half just say, I don't know. But an awful lot of people just don't understand. And I sometimes, like when I'm teaching a class with students, I say, imagine that your income hadn't gone up in more than 20 years. Wouldn't it be harder to just cover your basic expenses? And of course, everybody immediately understands that. Now we have at the federal level started using general fund revenue from other kinds of taxes and fees to sort of backfill the money that is allocated in the Highway Trust Fund. But yeah, we really have to do something. Either we just have to, as a country, decide, well, we're not going to have a user pay model anymore. Or at least we're going to accept that maybe users, direct users, are only paying some fraction. I don't know if it's a third or half or what. Or if we believe that the user pay model makes sense, then we've got to figure out a different mechanism. And maybe that will be mileage fees, but it could be other things. There definitely could be energy taxes. It could be annual registration fees. With trucking, we could have, actually mileage fees just for the trucking industry. Now, I think we're starting to realize that that's something that we could apply to everybody.
Yeah, although I will tell you the level of support for that among truck drivers with the profit margins are just razor thin is low to no, honestly. Mm-hmm. One of the other figures, and not from your research, but that I find fascinating about this is that I think the average sedan in terms of federal fuel tax pays, I think $96 to $100 a year for the use of the federal highway system. And I think people are always surprised by that, much as you said about the last time it was raised. I think people tend to think they pay more than that.
Oh, yes. We've tried asking, how much do you think you pay? And it's kind of and we get answers up to like $2,000 a year. I mean, clearly ridiculous, but most people are not guessing 100 or less. They were guessing considerably higher. Now, of course, if you add your state fuel tax in as well, you may be up to a few $100s a year. But even that, I mean, if, our roads are a basic utility that we all rely on, not only to move ourselves, but to have things brought to us. If you compare your phone bill, your electricity bill, a few $100s a year doesn't seem that out of line, I think.
No, I pay more than that a month for my electricity.
Right, yeah,
so.
Yeah, or your cell phone bill.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Well, thank you very much for your time and for all the information. I certainly appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to join you. And I, if you or members have questions or ideas for future research, I hope you'll reach out to me and let me know.
That was Dr. Asha Weinstein Agrawal, a researcher at San Jose State University's Mineta Transportation Institute, talking about an ongoing survey of public attitudes regarding how we pay for highways. Once again, we'll have links to the study, to Landline Magazine's coverage, and to the Mineta Transportation Institute on our website, landlinenow.com. For truck drivers, how we pay for highways is a far more serious issue than it is for car drivers, if nothing else because of the significant amount of fuel the average trucker purchases in a year, driving their contributions to road taxes into the thousands of dollars. For some perspective on this topic from truckers' point of view, I'm joined now by Colin Long of OOIDA's Washington, D.C. office. Colin, how are you doing?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Let's start with the general topic of how we pay for highways. What does OOIDA stand? What does the association think should be the method we use to pay for highways?
We've consistently said that the best, most effective, most simplistic way to provide the amount of funding that our highways require is to simply increase the fuel tax. For us, that means the diesel tax. For cars, it obviously means gasoline taxes. That really is very straightforward and effective. There's not a lot of administration involved in doing so, and it will certainly provide an influx of cash into the Highway Trust Fund, which benefits drivers because that goes right back out into repairing roads that need to be updated, as well as expanding capacity where there are currently bottlenecks. And it also improves a lot of things like safety, and hopefully also goes to some truck parking projects as well. So we've consistently said, just take the simplest route possible and increase the fuel taxes.
Well, and it's pertinent here that this fuel tax has not been raised since, I believe, 1993, right?
Yeah, it's been a long time.
Okay. What are the concerns that OOIDA has regarding vehicle miles traveled or other mileage-based fees as an alternative to the fuel tax?
I think it's just there's not a lot of trust in the folks who would authorize a VMT program, in this case Congress, or potentially even the Department of Transportation, but if we're being honest, it's Congress. Simply because when they've talked about it in the past, they kind of view it as simply a way to pull more money out of truckers without doing the same for other highway users. And we think fuel taxes aren't perfect. There's a lot of electric vehicles. There's a lot of hybrid vehicles that are benefiting from the current fuel taxes because they don't pay quite as much or they don't pay anything at all. And those problems would be resolved by a VMT. But certainly we're concerned that authorizers of a VMT program would simply look at truckers and say, here's some easy money. Let's put a lot of the burden from a VMT on them. Plus, a lot of our members don't like the thought of being tracked on a mile by mile basis. Some will say, ELDs are probably doing that right now. But, the federal government is only using ELDs to ensure hours of service compliance at this point. And there's a lot of concern that a VMT program would really get way too intrusive into the lives of truckers. And frankly, I think that's a very valid, salient argument to make against them.
We just have about a minute left here, Colin. Fuel tax revenue is falling, as we know, due to better fuel economy in cars and so on. So at some point, something will probably have to replace the fuel tax. What other methods might work if not VMT?
There's folks talking about registration fees where you pay either up front or over the course of a year, and we figure out what is an equitable registration fee between different sizes and scales of vehicles. And there's a lot of pitfalls in there, too, that needs to be worked out. But, the key for OOIDA is to be involved in all these conversations, and we certainly are, because we need to not only protect our members, but we need to ensure that we're moving to a system or modifying the existing system in a way that benefits our drivers and provides equal responsibility for funding our infrastructure among all highway users.
Excellent. Colin, thank you very much for the information.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
I've been talking with Colin Long of OOIDA's Washington, D.C. office. If you want to make your voice heard on any of the issues we discussed today, you should call your representatives at the state and federal level, and you could do that by using the website fightingfortruckers.com. That's our program for today. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm Mark Rettig, and this is Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
Penske owns and operates some of the best-maintained vehicles on the planet. Our used trucks come with a 5-year maintenance report and pre-sale inspection. So if you're in the market for a top-quality pre-owned truck, look no further. Search our inventory today at PenskeUsedTrucks.com.
Control your toll costs and eliminate tolling headaches with Prepass Tolls. Prepass Tolls means toll volume discounts. Just one invoice for all tolls and fewer violations. Call 877-878-5970 or go to prepass.com.
I'm a dad,
a son,
a husband,
wife.
I'm a writer,
photographer.
I farm.
I'm a veteran.
I love old cars, fishing,
my kids,
chrome,
and I am
a professional truck driver.
And together we are OOIDA.
OOIDA was founded by truckers to stand up and speak on behalf of truckers. We've done that by combining the individual voices of our members into a single, powerful voice. Protecting your interests, defending your rights.
Join us! Make your voice heard. Join OOIDA, the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. Call 1-800-444-5791 or visit OOIDA.com.